everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? The city is no longer on fire. That's good. The move of our country, the swift move into fascism has not been fun. How are you? How was everything? Hey, look, this is positive. It's the 15th anniversary of the show. That's exciting. I have a great guest today. 15 years. I don't like to do a lot of navel gazing on the show. I mean, sometimes in interviews to use myself as a mirror for the guests. But, not in these intros. Intros are very quick. Hello. Say one depressing thing about the world. Then the bio of my guest and a couple episodes in the future to look forward to. But this is 15 years is a special one for me because I'll take a minute or two. This show started as a podcast that my sketch partner Mark and I began in the very, very early days of podcasting. Marin, Comedy Bang Bang, Never Not Funny, us. I think we were the top 4 in podcasting. But Mark and I moved to New York to do sketch, and as you'll hear in this episode talking to David, by the time we got to New York, sketch was dead. Very few people were doing it. Or doing it the way we wanted to. Murder Fist, I think, may have been the only sketch group really killing it. And Mark and I, we wanted to be Bob and David. Mr. Show was such an important sketch show for us. Such an important inspiration to what we wanted to do. But, sketch wasn't really happening in New York at the time. We were performing, but we were like... without connections, how does anyone do anything in this industry? How do you even, get to be Bob and David? And that's why we started the show originally. And then Mark stopped performing a little while later, and I kept going, and I was selling and writing TV and film projects that never get made. Kind of became my career. The show morphed into the Freudian existentialist art project that it has become. And I still don't see a lot of other people having these kind of conversations. And I really enjoy getting to have these talks with people I admire. And I guess I'm going to keep doing it until I get bored or I am thrown in Guantanamo because I say something in 2026 on Twitter like, hey, maybe we shouldn't execute professors. I mean, we're not there yet. But the idea that we could be rounded up is not that crazy at this point. I don't know. Maybe they're so dysfunctional. You know what? But I believe in this administration. I believe they'll get their shit together. I believe that they can achieve their fascist dreams. Jesus Christ. Hey, why don't we get into today's episode? Because it was an absolute honor to talk to my guest, David Cross. And if you don't know who David is, I am going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Roswell, Georgia, comedian and actor David Cross started as a stand-up at the age of 17, first in Boston and then in New York in the 90s. David's television career began with a writing job on The Ben Stiller Show. That's where I first saw him. It was around this time that he met Bob Odenkirk, and they started performing together, eventually creating the brilliant sketch show Mr. Show, which ran on HBO for 4 seasons. Since then, David has done a million awesome things, including Arrested Development, the increasingly poor decisions of Todd Margaret, as well as smaller parts in everything from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind to What We Do in the Shadows. He's also performed 8 stand-up albums and specials. His latest, Worst Daddy in the World, just came out last year on 800 Pound Gorilla, and it's a delight. And of course, you can see him touring this spring if you live in Canada or Europe, which seem like great non-US places to be at the moment. What can I say? Seeing Mr. Show, obsessing about Mr. Show, really helped crystallize an existential path for me. And I was super scared to talk to David, but he could not have been nicer. This was a very lovely talk. I hope you enjoy it. Coming up on the show next week, one of my favorite directors, Guy Maddin. Speaking of Canada, comic folks like Jamie McKelvey and Daniel Warren Johnson. Bob Mould. I just talked to Bob Mould. He was lovely. Talked about the early days of Husker Du, finding your path in life, all that kind of stuff. So look forward to those. But for now, let's talk to David. fact that like fires could pop up anywhere was I don't know. I mean, you were here during the riots. I don't know when you moved here, but like
I got there like right when did I get there? I might have been visiting, but I think I was definitely there during the riots.
You know, we've been here when the kind of civil rights remix in 2020 kicked off. We were here, you know, we're here during these fires, and it's just strange. I don't know how it was when you were here, but like it all seems remote, even though it's happening miles down the road, even though friends of ours had to evacuate, other friends have lost their homes. It all feels weirdly remote. I wonder if that's just the age that I'm in, or if it's where everything feels like.
Well, I was in New York downtown during 9/11, and I remember I think it was like when the cell service came back, which I think was the next day or something like that. And a friend of mine who lives at the time he lived on Amsterdam and like in the 90s or something like that. And he called and he was so like naive to what everybody was going through down there. And he was just a couple miles straight up. And that was, I've never forgotten it. He was like, it was like, hey, how you guys doing? Do you want to go get drinks or something? And it was like, what are you talking about? It's a smoldering, acidic, toxic, things are crumbling. This is crazy down here. You can't leave. People, they had like, you couldn't go below 14th Street unless you showed, proof of that you lived there. And then you couldn't go down below Houston. It was crazy. So that is not a new thing, I suppose, the idea of the remoteness of it, even though it's relatively nearby.
I wonder if it's social media has created the context in which I'm not experiencing the thing, but I am getting all of the negative emotions from it. So it's like a weird ambient despair.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, that's not for you to answer. I'm just musing out loud. But I was thinking, this week has been particularly, this is, the week of the inauguration. And so it's been 3 weeks of sleeplessness for me. And I was thinking, I'm like, oh, you were 16 when Reagan became president, if I have the math right.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, was there any kind of similar shift for you, or did you notice it, or was there anything?
Well, not really. I was in Georgia, and I can't say, it was, I wasn't fully cognizant of what the Reagan administration was going to mean. Mm-hmm. AIDS wasn't a thing yet. And I do remember, this is so exemplary of the Republicans and the mindset. And I remember Carter had put solar panels on the White House, on top of the White House. And one of the first acts, the very first thing they did was like kind of condescendingly, smugly rip them out. And it was such an odd, and they were like proud of it. And like, there was this weird, fuck you quality to it. That of course, we've seen a lot worse of that same kind of idea in place. So I remember that, and I remember just thinking how weird and petty, and it was just silly. And then, but it wasn't until I was older and I kind of got into punk music, and I became, I wasn't just reading the Atlanta Journal Constitution headlines, and I had a more, I had a bigger appetite and more places to get information as I got a little older. And then I moved to Boston when he was still president, and I really got a sense of it there, but not initially. I mean, I was in, suburban, rural Georgia, so there wasn't a huge shift and that I could notice.
That's it. That's the other thing. When you mentioned punk, I was trying to put together over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, what really started to get me, I was going to say interested in politics, but politically aware, I think, is probably the better term. And I'm like, oh, it was through punk music. It was through, I was there a decade or more later after, the original hardcore bands, after like Minor Threat and Black Flag. Mm-hmm. But still, I was listening to that stuff. That Sonic Youth, Fugazi, like these are the things that started to make me look outside of, my suburban kind of outlook.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania, which I looked up Roswell's population. I'm like, I think we grew up in kind of like similar, kinds.
Well, Roswell now is, I tell this to anybody who, especially people who live in Atlanta or move to Atlanta, that it's not like New York or LA or Chicago or Boston or, Atlanta doesn't resemble what it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, and Roswell's now a part of the city. It's north and it's a little removed, but it's one big sprawling thing. But when I was there, you felt very, it was just a rural suburb, and you didn't feel near a city at all.
There wasn't even like I would go to Philly to go see shows. But there was no sense of that where like I could go into Atlanta and go see a show or something like that.
Oh, yeah. No, there was. And you would either take the bus or you drive in. But it was now there are venues in North Atlanta, and there are places to go see shows, and the Braves moved their whole stadium up there. And it's all, if you go to Roswell, you feel like you're in Atlanta. You're not in downtown, but you are in a city. When I was there, it did not feel, there's nothing that felt, there was a city, 30-minute drive on the highway away, but just not, it's not like it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. So is punk though, where you become more politically aware?
It was part of it. It was, I always had a kind of a interest in that stuff, and my mom did, and kind of encouraged that. And we would talk about things, and I'd, try to avail myself of whatever news there was. And my mom would listen to NPR in the car and stuff like that. And so that's, the introduction of punk and new wave and, music with a social message kind of dovetailed with just getting older and getting new friends and becoming part of this artistic community. And these are the things we care about. And, having more gay friends, right, as like AIDS was coming out and all that stuff. And so it was all part of it.
Do you remember, was there a particular band at all that you were into at that time?
So this guy, I worked at the Tower Place 6 movie theaters in Buckhead, and this guy who was a couple years older than me, I believe his name was Bob Harris, in no small part changed my life, or certainly, gave me my life a direction it didn't have at that point, and made me a mixtape. Because I think I was listening to something, I don't remember what it was. I was like, whoa, this is great. What is this? And he's like, oh, this is X or whatever. And I was like, wow, I love it. And he's like, oh, I'll make you a whole tape of, I think the only artist on there that I had heard of before was Elvis Costello. So it had Gang of Four, Dead Kennedys, Make DeVille, X. Oh gosh, who else was on there? But really, Buzzcocks. So a mix of punk and new wave, and I just fucking loved it. And then I started, then shortly around that time, and that's what also the kind of artsy new wave Atlanta, Athens scene was really starting to come up. So you had REM and Pylon and Now Explosion. I would go to see those shows. There's a photo somewhere of at the oh god, what was it called? The Peachtree Park at Piedmont Park. They had like an arts, 2 weeks of an arts thing, and it was like, I believe, Little Tigers opening up for REM, and I'm just sitting on this little hill with my friends, and it was like an old school picture. It wasn't a phone picture. And then I think we had cut school, so that was happening while, and then this movie called Erg: A Music War came out, and I would just watch that over and over, and I just which was all live. It was a film, but it was UK and American bands, live performances, and then if you have a interest in that, and I did, and then you find people in that community, and they go, "Oh, you should listen to this band. They're called The Birthday Party, and they're fucking great." Okay, cool. Oh, I love it. And then somebody goes, "Oh, you like The Birthday Party? Listen to this," and so it was a lot of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was part of I went to Pitt, and I was part of the radio station there, and that formed my personality going forward from there, for better or worse.
Yeah.
The other thing, when you said you skipped school, I was a little good boy, and stuff like that scared me. And I'm curious if it was when you skipped school, was that something that that was like, yeah, we skipped school, wasn't a big deal? Or
I don't mean to imply that I did it often. I didn't, but that was a something worth skipping school for. And at that point, I would have been like junior or a senior. And so, when you're 17, 18, who gives a shit? Take a day off. It's not a big deal. Mm-mm. It's not. No. Yeah.
You're talking to it. I was terrified that my parents got into my head that my permanent record mattered so much that if there was a blemish on it, my entire future would be fucked. And so I was terrified of, like, there were certain contexts where, like, in school, if I knew I was doing well in a class and the teacher liked me, I could fuck around and make jokes. Mm-hmm. But unless I was absolutely sure, I would never kind of like step outside the lines.
Right.
And I'm curious if you were more of a fearless person when you were younger.
I mean, yeah, yes and no. I in a relative sense, yes. I wasn't a troublemaker, as it were. I definitely was sarcastic, and I was quick with retorts, I would say. Mm-hmm. That could sometimes get me in trouble. But I wasn't trying to stir shit up. But I definitely, much like my stand-up ended up being, like, I didn't have the thing, and still don't, where it's like, oh, you shouldn't talk about that. So I would use language or ask questions that were not necessarily what you might expect, in 10th grade.
Because you started doing stand-up pretty early, I think, like in your teens still, right?
Yes.
I mean, that requires some kind of, well, I don't know. I in my mind, to have like a thought about like what you might want to do or what direction, or even like trying something like that early on, means you have some kind of like, you're self-possessed, you are whatever that thing is where you just said, where you're like, I'm going to say what I want to say. Like there's some, is that something that you always had that was just there as part of your?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. And, it wasn't, I grew up in a house. My mom encouraged me, or I should say, certainly didn't discourage me from asking questions, and hard questions. And if I felt something was not if something wasn't equitable, or if it was, or my questions, when I was younger, like, well, how come black people had to go through the thing? I didn't understand it. And so, I mean, I don't know. It's a thing. And also the religious aspect of it is important to this mixture, because early on I questioned all that stuff. And and again, my mom wasn't the kind of like, hush up, don't say that. And don't, completely let me ask questions and find out and try to get answers, and would answer me best she could, but, encourage me. All right, well, if I don't know, ask a rabbi, but early on I was kind of, without saying it, going like, this is bullshit. And and then as I got older, and I definitely, and I read more. I read at an early age, and the kind of stuff I was reading became a little bit more, it was less Chronicles of Narnia and more, the case against God or whatever, like things like that. I was reading, oh gosh, he's great. He was a 20s, not Buckminster Fuller, he was a architect. The guy who wrote the case against God. It was, oh shoot. Anyway, it was very influential, and it's just logic. And then you're reading Vonnegut, and, as you get older, and just things. So that was a lot of the shaping was, and then, like-minded friends. And as you get older, you become more solidified as you're, getting more information. So, I mean, it was, I don't know. Here's the thing. Here's like a side, anecdotal thing, that when I was doing comedy, when I was starting, and I wasn't that good. I was interesting and different, but I wouldn't say good. But I was developing my voice and my material and all that stuff. And then I knew when I started getting work, when I started going on the road and opening for these other comics, and most of them were not very good. But I would know, like, on the first show, if you get there, like, you're in Corpus Christi for a week, and you're at the Comedy Condo and whatever, and I'm 18, maybe 19, and I would do my set, and if I came off, this happened so many times, and the headliner, who I hadn't seen yet, and if I came off and the headliner or the middle act was like, boy, kid, you got some guts there. You got some balls, or whatever. Because I didn't feel like I did. I knew they would suck. So, because that would be the thing, like, boy, kid, you got some cojones on you, and whatever. I'd be like, well, this guy's going to suck. And almost 100% of the time it was true. And I don't know, early on, I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm talking in circles at this point, but it's like, I just didn't, nor do I have that thing that some people have, where it's like, oh, I better not bring this up. It might make people uncomfortable, or, or I don't want to risk my job or whatever it is. So I'm not, nor have I ever been that kind of person.
I mean, that's my entire childhood, is like a massive confusion. When you said, like, yeah, this is bullshit, like, there was always that kind of notion in the back of my head. And I always like pushed against things, but without being really, the minute it would upset someone, I kind of would like pull back, because I'm like, well, this is uncomfortable. And that comes right from my parents, who, in a good way, like, it comes from a good place. They didn't want to upset people. Right. But then I don't want to upset people means you just like have these kind of very distant emotional relationships. And I'm wondering if that kind of like you having this notion of like, well, I'm going to say what I want to say, and whatever happens. Like, were you like that in relationships, period, where like you could express your emotions no matter what?
I mean, the thing you got to understand though is it's not it's as I said before, I didn't think I was being courageous or any. It did that wasn't a that feels too
Self-aggrandizing.
yeah, and also like purposeful, and it wasn't. It was just I definitely had. I don't want to be disingenuous. I definitely had an understanding that I was, if I would say something or I had a question about something or brought something up that made other people uncomfortable, that was how adults spoke. I know you're not supposed to say that when you're 15, especially in Georgia. So I understood it as like, it's not a bad offensive question. It's offensive if it's a 15-year-old. And so that gives you a little bit more juice, as it were, a little more air in the sails. But there was nothing. And also it was kind of fun. I liked getting into debates and arguments and would, if somebody was saying you can't do that, it was like, why not? Why not? Why can't I? What is wrong with that? From a moral sense, where are you coming from? Legally, it's not an issue. So what, and just having this conversation about whatever the thing was. And I love that stuff. And it was, I felt like I walked away smarter for it. Either I convinced somebody of my point of view, or they would convince me of their point of view, and I would learn another angle. But it was like I enjoyed that, and again, that probably comes from my mom, who encouraged intellectual debate and discussion, and there were no such things as bad. There was no such thing as bad words for her. Words are words, and and I read Lenny Bruce's autobiography, and I read his book, and got turned on to him pretty early. And so it was just this notion of I'm going to say this thing, and I'm not whatever. I don't know.
No. I think this is really interesting. Because the way you said it. And also, like, I go ask the rabbi, it is very Talmudic in the way that you're like, which is just all this kind of arguing back and forth about the minutia of the Torah. Right. And so there is this very kind of like,
well, you can take the atheist out of the Jew, but you can't take the Jew out of the atheist.
But like, what was your mom's upbringing where she then was okay having this kind of, I'll say Talmudic because I can't think of a better word, household? Or way of raising you?
Yeah, I didn't know my grandfather, either one of them. They both died before I was born. And my grandmom and my mom had a weird relationship that made all of us a little uncomfortable. And my grandmom was very intellectual, but cold. One of the coldest people, just, not mean and not a shitty person, but just cold, no love, So there were two kids. There was my mom and her brother, her brother, my uncle, who went insane and really like in the space of a year. And I've seen these letters that he wrote to my mom when she was in school. And the degradation is rapid and marked, like just severe paranoia and crazy stuff. And he was committed, I think, when he was, let's say 18, maybe. And like he went to college for a semester, but then ended up living in the laundromat, and all these letters were just crazy. And I think that definitely affected the family. And then it was just my mom and my grandma, basically. And my grandma would go visit my uncle in a place, miles away where he was committed. And and it was just not Grey Gardens by any means, but there was not an equal give and take in that relationship. And my grandmom was very stern, and I think kind of a shitty mom from what I know of my mom's stories, even though she wouldn't say that, but I would just listen to the stories and go, well, that's kind of fucked up, And both my grandmother and grandfather were very intellectual, and then my mom had a really unfortunate. She met a guy. She didn't really date a lot or at all, and she was very antisocial, and just not. She's an introvert, and read a lot. And then she met this guy who's the exact opposite, who my grandmother, for all her faults, sussed out immediately, like, this guy's a piece of shit. And he was. And then he, basically, as I said, was the life of the party, was street smart, but not smart, book smart at all. And he was very extroverted, life of the party, jokey, all that kind of stuff, but also really severely irresponsible and kind of narcissistic. The kind of person who nothing is his fault, was never his fault. It's Trump. I mean, it's basically Trump. It's nothing's my fault. You can't fire me. I quit. That kind of attitude. And we moved around constantly when I was a little kid. And that was because of him. And my mom just sort of went along. And my mom is weak. She's a strong person that she could raise 3 kids with no money, no credit. My dad left us in debt and surprise debts that popped up, and we had nothing. And there's 3 kids, and I'm 9, or maybe I had just turned 10, and my other sister Wendy would have been 8, and then Julie, little sister, would have been 5. And you've got 3 kids who are hungry, who are like, why can't I have a Coleco football thing? And why can't I, and we were latchkey kids. My mom had a good job. And then, so we're coming home from school and making dinner for our little sister, me and my other sister, just shit like that. And my mom was, to go through all that was, you have to be strong, and loving, very nurturing, but she is of a weak character. She wouldn't stand up for herself. This guy just got away with everything, and she let him. And, she's told me that there were a number of times when she was like, I'm going to leave him. Enough's enough. And she never did. And, and she didn't have a support system. Her mom was kind of shitty. And her mom was, I told you so, kind of. And then she didn't have that many friends. So, she couldn't really. I don't know why this came up, but okay.
No. It's interesting. Like, how conscious were you of the dynamic when you were a kid? Or were you just kind of just like floating in this, like, oh, this feels tense?
Not that. Aware as any kid might be, like, there's definitely tension, but I would go to my friend's house and there'd be tension there. So it didn't feel like out of the ordinary. And also my generation, when we were kids, like everyone's parents were getting divorced. Like, to have friends who had a mother and father who were still together was rare, So it didn't seem that in my world, my life, what I understood life to be, it didn't seem that crazy. It was definitely frustrating. And I really, 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 really hated moving every year. And every year I was a new kid in school, new kid in class. And I would, miss classes because we had relocate and then took time to get to a school. When we moved back to Georgia, I was in the wrong school for almost a week, I would say. Like there were like 4 days, I want to say, when they said, "Oh, you live here, then he's not." I don't remember how the conversation went, but I literally had to be the new kid 2 weeks in a row. And also I looked different. I looked weird. I looked, I had a Jufro and glasses with tape on the side, and I was, there wasn't a whole lot of that in Roswell.
Yeah. No, I get that as one of the 3 Jews in my school in Pennsylvania, in KKK land. It very familiar. And that the thing is that marks you instantly.
Yeah.
Like you are. Yeah. Even if I didn't get a ton of like overt anti-Semitism, but there was definitely like, he's different. The vibe was he's different.
Oh, I myself and my sister both got like kind of shocking anti-Semitism, like just, which is another thing that lent the slow but steady dawning on me as a person going, oh, wait a second, these adults in positions of authority, whether it's my neighbors or my friends' mom and dad or teachers or doctors, oh, they're actually kind of dumb. They're like, it's a slow thing that you start to figure out when you're, I don't know, when you're like as you get to be 13-ish, like around there, 13, 14, and you're like, wait a minute, I think I'm smarter than you. I know. Wait, you're reading Us magazine, and wait, oh my gosh, oh, I think I'm smarter than you. But you don't know that, and you're like 13 years old, going, well, wait a minute. So,
well, yeah. I mean, I thought that my parents were furious at how arrogant I was because I'm like, come on, this stuff is dumb. Why are we not on the same page that whatever, this suburban lifestyle, which as an adult, I've been like, I really have softened my stance a little bit where I'm like, I guess as long as you're not an evil person, you do. Like, it really.
Now, wait a second. I want to get a sense of your background. So tell me about your family, and do you have brothers and sisters, and, were your parents religious or,
Yeah. Reformed Jews, parents from New York, ended up in Pennsylvania, my working class grandparents. My grandfather had to move to Pennsylvania to work in a shoe factory because that's where the work was. Right. My parents go back. My dad goes back to New York for college, then back to Pennsylvania to care for my great grandmother. Meets my mom there, who is going to college in Pennsylvania, and they end up starting a family there while caring for my great grandmother and just stay there. Always regretted, it seems, not going back to New York.
Did that ever come up? Did you ever sense that?
100%. It's why, like, weirdly, New York was always this kind of beacon to me, and that when I finally landed there, everything kind of fell into place in my life.
Yeah.
And they didn't mean to create that. They just like, it was just, I could smell the regret on them. It was like, it was like rotten eggs wafting off of them. I'm like, oh, okay, there's something here that.
Oh, that could be something from the Seder plate.
You smell like a shank bone. What's going on here? What is that? What emotion is that? But like, it just didn't feel right. And I don't know if it was their regret or if just like, and it wasn't a bad childhood. Like, I'm not trying to paint it like that. And they're not bad people at all. I think they've found a community there and they are religious and they have a community at the temple and they're now kind of like the elder statesmen there. But all of it, there was something just like very like when I started watching David Lynch, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. I get what you're saying now. It's all ears below the, on the ground somewhere. And this is why I'm kind of curious with you, because like when I reacted to them, it was kind of this lizard brain. There's something here. I can't articulate it. I'm not conscious of why I don't like this or why it feels stifling. I just know it does. I know there's more here. And I
Well,
don't, I,
so how old were you when you went, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be, New York. And
I mean, for real, like that's a conscious decision. Late 20s. Like I had
no, a feeling, not a decision that you acted upon, but the feeling of, oh, this isn't for me. I'm not supposed to be here in my later life.
15, 16. I think when I started dating my first girlfriend, and she had articulated ambitions outside of this. And I was just like, oh, wait, that makes sense. And it's probably why I was attracted to her.
Right.
So 15, 16, I think is the feeling, but it doesn't get articulated for another decade for real. And even then without going into it, it was a whole mess, but you had an actual articulated like feeling.
Yeah. I think by the time I was, like sixth grade, I'll say, I was like, I'm out of here as soon as I can. And part of it also is I was a pretty happy-go-lucky kid until I moved back down to Georgia. And my grades, I was like a good student, and my grades plummeted, and I was miserable, and that's because my life was a lot different and not good in many different ways. And that was coupled with, hormones and that, becoming that kind of person and individuating. And I knew, this is going to undercut everything I'm saying, but I knew New York was where I wanted to be early on, and where I should be, I think, where I was meant to be. But after high school, I applied to UGA because all my friends were going there. And I had gone up when I was in high school because I had some older friends that were there. And as I said, that whole scene was like, Athens is small. It's great college town. I love it. But, I'm saying all this about, I knew I was supposed to be in New York, but I wanted to go to UGA because that's where all my friends were. And I thought, I'll start a band,
Yeah.
And then I didn't get accepted. But I did get accepted to this school in Boston. And I was like, all right, Boston is like, it's not New York, but it'll do. And it'll do for being 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever. And it did. It was great. Things worked out quite well for considering all that stuff. So I'm glad UGA denied me and things worked out well.
What was it about New York early on? Was it just, obviously it's the cultural capital still, but
that's 90% of it. It's dangerous. It's exciting. It's everything that Roswell wasn't. And, it was challenging, and I like being challenged. It was oddly, simultaneously outside of my comfort zone and my comfort zone. And it just had opportunities, again, because I had started doing stand-up already and was enjoying it. It wasn't easy, but it was something I felt like I was supposed to do. And and then, to go to New York, which is the epicenter, I thought, okay, well, this will make sense. And again, I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I went to Boston first, because it's a smaller town, but also a thriving, huge, exploding comedy scene when I got there. And so I got a lot of work, and I met some really great, like-minded people that I'm friends with to this day. And it all worked out.
Yeah. I keep forgetting, by the way, too, that the New York that was the beacon for you was also the New York that was a beacon for me, but I'm getting there like 2 decades after it's already like, I mean, Giuliani has already done everything that Giuliani was going to do to the place. So like, it was all like, yeah,
no dancing.
So like the kind of gritty, like this is where the Velvet Underground, like that kind of stuff, the New York downtown art scene is predominant. Like that was all gone. Like they had all become, wealthy and had moved to Westchester or whatever by that point, or they owned the entire like loft that they did their art in and were like renting out the apartments below. Like that kind of like, it was already kind of dead when I got there. And I had to.
Well, wait. When did you get there?
So I went to grad school, and I was a philosophy professor. And then when I was starting my dissertation, I was like, "This is bullshit." Mm-hmm. And they kept asking me to do bullshit, and I kept not doing it and doing the thing I wanted to do until they were finally like, "You can't do this anymore. We're kicking you out." And I make that sound like I was like a real like rebel, like leather jacket type thing, when instead I was just like, oh, you're telling me to write about Aristotle? Well, I'm going to write about Heidegger. And then they're like, can you please just write about Aristotle? And I'm like, no, I'm going to write about Heidegger. And they're like, you're not following the directions. We're just asking you to follow the directions. That's it. So I didn't get there I didn't start doing comedy there until 2010.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It was gone. It was gone by then. Oh, I thought you were like going earlier, but okay, yeah, 2010 was, yeah, I would say it started kind of, oh gosh, like around, when did that, I mean, I can go by little degrees of like things that happen when they knocked down the thing on Houston, that big complex, and then put up a fancy apartments there. When they put the Kmart in Astor Place, when that big blue high rise on was it on Delancey, I think, or Rivington? Or, no, Delancey, the big blue that just stuck out, and it was just weird and like, oh, well, they're really. And then the death knell. I mean, they were all like little, death by 1,000 cuts, but the big one was on Ludlow, knocking down, the place where Luna Lounge was and all that, and Max Fish, and putting up, a fancy hotel and fancy apartments. And that was really like, oh, it's over.
Yeah. Like I get there at the tail end of like Rififi. Like I think I performed at Eugene Merman's show a couple times doing some weird sketches, and then that was over.
Yeah.
And then
that's too, well, it was, I'll tell you what, it was fucking awesome. It was great. It was a really great time to be there. Music, comedy, theater. I mean, it was, and just living there, just your life was fucking awesome. It was great. And I'm very happy I got to be a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I ended up there in like the coffin of that all, or like wandering around the corpse of it and being like, can I do something here?
Were you aware of that? Was that something that you felt or you knew, or like, had you visited, back in the early aughts and gone, wow, this is great? Or you just. No,
I just knew. This is the thing where I'm just like, I just knew that everything that I had been doing before felt bad. Mm. And I was in a band in college, and that was the first thing that feels right. But then my bandmates went off, he's a scientist now. He went to MIT, and I'm like, all right, so what's next? And then that's when I was like, well, maybe I could do comedy like all my heroes are, and then I was just too scared to take the leap. And this is the thing where I'm like, I'm kind of curious. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. We were like, fine. Like if we needed food or clothes, we had food or clothes. Like it wasn't bad, but like, it was always like, I had this drilled in my head, like you have to have a safety net. Mm-hmm. And so I was always doing things where I was safe up until I was like, it just culminated in that kind of like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like I'm not doing the thing, even though I was getting I was getting a stipend and a scholarship to go to grad school and be a professor and all this shit. It it culminated in just this like, fuck this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't have that, it seems. Even though I think maybe like you also didn't have a safety net. Question mark.
No, but I think I benefited from not having money, even though it sucked at the time and it was frustrating. But I learned to live without it, and you also just learn shit. Like the only thing that cost more money than you might normally ever spend on anything was rent, right? So I knew where to get cheap food. I knew where happy hour specials were that also sometimes had food. I knew a place where I could, hey, do you mind if I do some laundry in this thing? Like you just pick up on that stuff and you figure it out, and the main thing is rent, and then quite often meant a lot of roommates, some who I didn't care for, sharing a house and a refrigerator, but whatever. And for years and years and years and years and years, I mean, almost a decade, I had no real money, but I was doing stand up, and I would occasionally have a day job for a little while, and then I'd either quit or get fired, but I'd have enough to last me a little bit. I was getting cash under the table, $35 here, $50 here to do stand up, and as long as you had rent, that's all. And because clothing was super cheap. I lived around the corner at one point from $1 a pound in Boston, in Kendall Square. And I'm going to repeat that, $1 a pound. And it's exactly what it sounds like. There's clothes in big piles in this cold, like a second floor walk up kind of warehouse space. And it was $1 a pound. So you could get, and so, yeah, it was, and I laughed a lot, had a lot of fun, did a lot of drugs, was doing 2-3 sets a night whenever I wanted, playing softball during the day. A lot of my friends were in bands. I'd go see them. And it was this really fun community. We had no money, but there was a lot of laughs. And I knew early on, back when I was in Atlanta, that I'm going to do something in the arts, like stand up or make films or do this thing or that thing. But stand up was always like a kind of important and a more intuitive thing to me. And so, when I was in Boston, I did a lot of stand up because I wasn't that great, but they needed, there was a comedy boom and every place has stand up. So they just needed bodies to put up on stage. So even if I suck, but it was all that I was accruing experience and writing material and finding my voice and getting a name for myself. And all that was, was valuable.
Yeah. Okay. We're right at the end, and I'm just kind of curious. You said you wanted to do something in the arts from an early age, but was it always that? What was the original kind of existential desire?
Oh, the original thing that, the first time I said, that wasn't like, I'm going to be an astronaut or something like that.
Right.
Was I had read narration for some school thing. And it was a story called The Musicians of Bremerton or something like that. It's a kid's story. And I was the narrator. And then I really enjoyed it. And I said to my mom, when I grow up, I want to be a professional narrator. And not knowing that wasn't a thing. That's not, now, yeah, sort of you can, I guess, but it wasn't really a thing. But that would be and I was probably 6, and that would be the very first time I didn't see it as like my path to fame and riches. It was just the thing. It was sort of performing, and that was the very first thing where I that was a public speaking, as it were. So
yeah, did that make you then follow that path? Or was it just like, this is what I want to do and I'll get back to this later? Or did you start taking actual steps in your life?
No, I didn't really take steps. It just was the first inkling that I was comfortable public speaking, being on stage. I enjoyed it. And, what would later on in as in high school when you're putting on shows and stuff, like would start doing that kind of stuff. But and I would, me and various friends would write comic books, draw comic books and things like, and then you get introduced to National Lampoon and you're like, oh, and then you're, doing things that are kind of like what Army Man was, if you know that, and just sort of comedy, and then doing recordings, like comedy audio things, me and my friends and in his room writing sketches. So little things that haven't taken that shape. It's not like we're going to sit down, we're going to write a 30-minute comedy album. We were just being funny with each other, but not with an eye towards, hey, maybe I can get this on the radio. We're just fucking around, When you go to start stand-up, is it just, this is it? I'm going to do this no matter what. I'm going to just follow this to whatever end it leads to. Yeah, pretty much. For me, there was never the kind of bargain that people make with themselves. Like, I'll give it 2 years. And if I haven't achieved this, I've never done that, never thought that way, clearly, because I hadn't achieved things for years and years and years, but I enjoyed it. It was important to me. These were my friends. This is my community, my family. And it's where I really thrived, could speak my mind and was comfortable on stage, even though a lot of times you're not comfortable. It's quite the opposite. But the idea of it and doing it and the it of it was what I was supposed to be doing. And I never had that kind of, I'm going to give it 5 years. And if not, I'll go back to school or whatever. It's just, this is what I'm going to do. And I knew that pretty early. Yeah. And did your mom encourage that? Well, she didn't discourage it. She was never, ever, ever you should be a doctor or a lawyer, never like that. And I think, I was closer to her. I was like the only one of my siblings who like read the news and had opinions about this thing that she could talk to. And I was the oldest. And so, I think she knew kind of, it doesn't matter what she says, I'm going to do my own thing anyway. So, you know what I mean? Yeah. Do you think like having to care for your youngest sibling, did you have to like become more mature earlier than you might have otherwise? Yeah. I remember my mom, we were driving, or she was driving, and I was, and I remember her saying like, okay, you're the man of the family. And I just turned 10 years old. And I was like, I got it, but I felt it was unfair and I didn't really want it. And I understood, and she needed help. And I didn't, I didn't go, fuck that, but I remember kind of resenting it and understanding, yeah, I get it. But, there's a little like, but I'm a kid, Yeah. And it wasn't like there were massive responsibilities. It was just, it was mostly find something for Julie to do that wasn't just sticking her in front of the TV, and make sure she's, eating, Yeah. And that was, outside of that, you have your own friends and your own things that you want to do. But yeah, we would, Wendy and I would get home and, make like dinner for everybody, late lunch dinner, and make sure, everybody ate and cleaned up the dishes and that. And then my mom would be home around, 5:45, 6 o'clock, and then we'd hang out, whatever, and then get up and do it again the next day. Because it seems very Gilmore Girls is the only thing I can think of, but in the sense that like she's still the parent, but you also are elevated in a sense to
close
Yeah.
to peer.
And she let me know that all the time too, like in a way I didn't particularly care for, but yeah, that was part of it.
I wonder if that helped. This is complete idle thought, but like, I wonder if that helped solidify your choices earlier on, where you were a little more confident in like who you could be because you were a little more mature or had to have these mature adult responsibilities.
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe, but I don't know. I just remember feeling like, oh, I can't afford, I'm not allowed to have these immature moments where I'm a brat or I'm not getting what I want, or I'm misbehaving, even though I did that, but I felt like, oh, I'm not allowed to do that because I got to be the one who's helping mom and doing all that stuff. And, I'm 10. So,
Does that create any kind of like resentment inside where you're like, I don't like this?
Well, I didn't like my whole situation. My whole situation sucked. It wasn't just, oh, my dad left. It wasn't just, oh, we literally have no money. And it wasn't just, okay, all your new friends are going to be anti-Semitic, racist, assholes. It was all of that put together. Oh, your teachers are going to go from being good teachers, appropriate for, fourth grade brains and nurturing stuff, to being weird. It was all that happened at the same time. So, yeah, I mean, things sucked. It was bad.
And that's where it all forms, where you're like, I got to get out of here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, partly. Yeah.
But then you followed it. I think this is it. We're at the very end, but like you followed it out, which I think is the most interesting, where you're like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to get out of here. And then you did.
Yeah. And I went to Boston.
Yeah.
Although I tried to go to Athens.
It's very admirable. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
This is a delight. I can't tell you enough how much of a profound effect Mr. Show has had on my life.
Right on. I'm glad to hear it.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.